All right, joining us now to look at the impact of today's public sector strike and a huge concern out of some members of the GEPF about what is called the Actuarial Interest Factor changes. We're joined now by Economist and Director at Inkunzi Wealth Group, Owen Nkomo. A very good evening to you, Owen. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. So before we get to the GEPF matters, let's just first talk about the impacts of today's strike on the economy. We've said that largely it was seen to not have disrupted government services, but we mentioned the blockages at the Lebombo border post. What is your assessment on whether or not public sector workers made their mark by putting pressure on government to reconsider this 3% wage hike?
Good evening, SABC, and thanks for having me here tonight. I think that the assessment that, broadly speaking, the strike didn't have a major impact on the economy, I think is correct. I think it will take a little bit longer than just a one-day strike by the public servants to influence the hand of government to change its views on the current offer that they've put on the table. So I think that maybe a more protracted strike would get the government to listen. I'm not saying that I'm advocating for one, but I'm saying that for the government to listen, or for the government to turn around and say, okay, let's go back to the drawing table, I believe that this strike would have to be, would have to take a little bit longer. And it will have to most probably not be a peaceful strike than we have seen today. It's been very peaceful. And I don't think in terms of the economy, it hasn't actually been a very big impact. But I can say that the country cannot afford to have such strikes happening on a very regular basis. Like, we just came out of the strike at Transnet. And there's been strikes in the mining sector, and all of those things do add up to take away from the country's growth.
I mean, it's push and pull factors, isn't it? Because workers are saying they have no choice. The cost of living is simply impossible. And I think a great deal of the workforce in this country can attest to that. And unless you're earning at management level, it's somewhat more bearable. And civil servants are saying we just can't make it, especially the fact that we don't even have benefits that help us along to meet government halfway in saying we can lower our demands to less than inflation.
It's quite a major conundrum, Jeffy, Tapiso, because on the one hand, the economy is not growing fast enough, and inflation continues to go up. Inflation is at levels that we haven't seen in a long time, and the prices of food, prices of energy, prices of transport are actually all going up. And then on the other end, you've got a government that is obviously battling to make sure that the demands that are being made by its employees can be met without putting a major shift and pressure on the government's fiscus or the government national budget. Any further increases in government expenditure, particularly when it comes to government employees, will certainly blow our budget into a worse off position than it currently is already. And it's sitting in a position where we're paying north of 600 billion rands of the government's total collected revenue that is put aside for the budget to pay government salaries. So I do think that any major increases that happen here are being seen by the government and National Treasury and the Ministry of Finance as currently being unaffordable. And I think in an environment maybe where the economy was growing faster than it is at the moment, the government might probably find it easier to have a different conversation. So it's definitely a very tricky balance to achieve, given the current economic environment. Inflation is very aggressive, but the government doesn't have any levers to pull, given the stagnation in the economy.
And while we're thinking about the short term, there certainly is also concern about the long-term retirement funds, the GEPF, its Actuarial Interest Factor changes coming into effect 1st of November. Why are there concerns around it, particularly as I understand that there was and should have been consultation with labor organizations about the revised factors?
So perhaps maybe we should start by defining what this factor is. This factor is one important element in calculating how much each government employee has in the government's pension pot that is being managed by the GEPF and invested by the PSA. So that factor gets revised on a 3-year basis, where the government tries to assess what the fund's values are, and therefore do an attribution to say each member in the scheme how much is due to them. So this factor has been revised again, and it was implemented. That revision was implemented on the 1st of November. And unfortunately, as you talk about consultation, most of the commentary we're getting out there, most of the public employees that work for the government that we talked to, saying they didn't get a sense that there was enough consultation around this process. And the most important thing that I'm getting here is the fact that they are being shocked, particularly those people going on resignation and they're leaving the GEPF scheme. They're particularly shocked at how much money their benefits have been adjusted by since the 1st of November. On average, even the GEPF themselves admit that the reduction in the benefits is about 14% to PSA, and that is quite a lot of money. If you're expecting to get a valuation of R1 million, all of a sudden it's 140,000 rands less. And I think that it's going to be a conversation to be had for the next few months, in my view. And I think the PSA is going to have a lot of work to do as well to try and see if it can, negotiate a better option for its members. But it's not happened before that this factor being adjusted downwards has been changed in the past. So I think it's going to be difficult to see that happening.
And just in layman's terms, Owen, what accounts for that gap in the valuation, whether it's for salaries or pension funds? Because I believe for 2021, the statutory actuarial valuation was higher than in the previous valuation in 2018. So I just want to understand internal and external factors. And also, the GEPF says there's a common misconception from members that a reduction in actuarial factors is a reduction in the guarantees promised to them by the fund.
Well, there's a lot of factors that the GEPF considers, particularly in the assessment of the GEPF's evaluation of assets under management, which ultimately impact the benefits that accrue to each member. But the most important thing here is that the GEPF is talking about the economic environment, which is not great. They're talking about inflation, which is very high. And the GEPF is actually, interestingly enough, assuming a 9.2% long-term inflation number, which means they don't believe that inflation is going to stay at this current mid-sevens for a long time. It is far higher than the long-term average of 6%. And definitely there seems to be a gap between the government's long-term liabilities and what the fund is actually able to pay if all of those funds were to be paid out to members of the GEPF in one go. That's just bring it down to the layman's level to understand, so that we don't confuse people with a lot of actuarial speak here, Tapiso. So the government is basically trying to, in my view, trying to make sure that they do whatever is possible to make sure that the numbers in the long term can balance. They are trying to react potentially to negative markets going forward, to inflation staying high. But a different school of thought is saying that maybe the government is trying to discourage people from leaving the scheme. Because if you look at the statement, most of the people that will be impacted by this latest change are people that are going to be resigning, or people that have died in service, or people that are part of a divorce process, which ultimately results in funds leaving the GEPF, and obviously is not quite great for the GEPF scheme.
And those resignations that will be affected, should one choose to go ahead, or perhaps those who have before 1 November, what is the period, the length of period at which those pension funds will be affected? Because I see a figure of something like 10 years.
So look, the way this is going to work, Sophie, so maybe to put this into context. So when the GEPF started this process of consultations, they were looking for feedback from people to say, this is what we're going to be doing. They consulted the people on the board that represent government employees. And if, for example, if you were going to leave in October, up to the 31st of October, or the last date of October, and your benefit was 3 million rands, on implementation date, which is the 1st of November, the actuarial impacts, or the impact of the adjustment in the actuarial values, means that your pension benefit is all of a sudden very low. So that is going to touch on people who had already made their submissions, and their submissions are already in the pipeline, and people that are actually planning to leave in the next coming couple of months, and people that are going to leave post, obviously, the implementation on the 1st, regardless of whether they they submitted before October now are going to be impacted. So this factor is going to be applicable until the next round of revisions, which is going to be in 2025. Given where the economy is, I strongly believe that there might also be another downward revision to people's benefits, given the fact that the economy might not necessarily recover in that period. So that is extremely important to note for people that are part of the scheme and who have been affected. And we've generally advised TEPISO that the most important thing we believe that government employees need to take out of this, particularly those looking to exit, is to sit and get good advice from specialized or specialist retirement advisors.
All right, Owen, much appreciated. He's Economist and Director of Inkunzi Wealth Group. Owen Nkomo speaking about the public sector strike and, of course, the GEPF. We're talking about the Actuarial Interest Factor, the changes that are coming into effect, that came into effect 1st of November.